Warning: federal law allows citizens to reproduce, distribute, or exhibit portions of copyrighted motion pictures, videotapes, or video discs under certain circumstances without authorization of the copyright holder. This is called for use and is allowed for purposes of criticism, news reporting, teaching, and parody, which doesn't infringe of copyright under 17 USC 107.
A man who was released from prison early is now facing 3 first-degree murder charges. Lawrence Paul Anderson is accused of 3 killings, including the killing of his neighbor Andrea Blankenship and cutting her heart out, according to the Associated Press. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation says that Anderson brought the heart to his aunt and uncle's house, cooked it with potatoes, and tried to serve it before killing his uncle, Leon Pye, wounding the aunt, and killing the pair's 4-year-old granddaughter, the AP reported.
details just revealed after a 67-year-old man and his 4-year-old granddaughter were found stabbed to death in a Chickasha home.
And we want to warn you, these details are very, very graphic and disturbing. New court documents say the suspect, who is a 67-year-old man's nephew, first killed their female neighbor. They say he cut out her heart and then tried to feed it to his family members before also attacking them. The Grady County DA telling us today the suspect was just recently released from prison after serving time for possession.
He's released in January of this year, approximately 3 weeks before he committed these crimes. 3 weeks. And he's back in jail again with allegations that he's killed 3 people.
And the young girl's grandmother, who survived, also was stabbed in the eyes by the suspect. He now faces, as you can imagine, several charges, including felony maiming and first-degree murder.
That are very disturbing, and at this point I don't think it's appropriate for me to go into that. This defendant, under the United States Constitution, stands innocent of the charges that he is facing at this point. He has been charged, and it is nothing more than that. Until the state proves beyond a reasonable doubt and there's a finding of guilt, he stands innocent of the charges that he faces. At this time, on February the 23rd of 2021, the state of Oklahoma elected to file a 5-count information against Lawrence Paul Anderson. 3 counts of murder in the first degree, 1 count of assault and battery with a deadly weapon, and 1 count of maiming. The counts of assault and battery with a deadly weapon and the count of maiming are both with respect to Desley Pye, and in Oklahoma, assault and battery with a deadly weapon is in essence Oklahoma's attempted murder statute. We don't have one that specifically says attempted murder, but we will have to prove that that was the intent of Anderson at the time that he assaulted Miss Pye. As far as the information that led to the filing of these charges, I'm going to be very brief with that. The Chickasha Police Department received a call and went out to take a look at what was going on and exactly what the call was all about. When they arrived, 2 of the officers went in, secured the scene. They found two dead people, 2 bodies, and they also found Anderson, where they put him in custody. Anderson had a couple of superficial wounds to his chest area. He was admitted to Grady Memorial Hospital and later transferred to OU Medical Center, where he received treatment. He's been released. He is housed in the Grady County Jail at this time. Upon an interview with this defendant, with Anderson, the OSBI came to the realization that there was a possibility of a 3rd body. They made contact with the Chickasha Police Department. The Chickasha Police Department went to do a welfare check on Andrea Blankenship, and when they arrived there, they found Andrea dead inside her home, and an investigation at that point ensued. I want to note and thank the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation for their services, their dedication, and what they've done in this particular case. Investigator Alvarez was with me in the courtroom this afternoon. She had to leave and go tend to some other business. Investigator Francis had to go to Cordell this afternoon to get a search warrant signed, and he could not be here either. But I will tell you, those 2 investigators have done a phenomenal job, and it's the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation that have presented a great case to this office that we're going to be able to use and go into a courtroom and seek justice for these 3 victims. With that, I think there's a question that this case begs, and that is, when is enough enough? We have seen criminal justice reform in the state of Oklahoma now for several years. And I would ask all Oklahomans to ask them a question. Do you feel safer in your communities today than you did before criminal justice reform started? And I think the answer to the people in Oklahoma and the people that I talk to in my district is an unequivocal no. We have put politics and releasing inmates in front of public safety. The goal that we have set in Oklahoma is to decrease the prison population with no thought of public safety. And that's not fair to the people of the state of Oklahoma. And we have to come to terms with that. We're increasing and we are making our citizens less secure, and more scared inside their homes and inside their own communities because of some of the things that we've done. In this particular case, with respect to Anderson, and I think everybody in here has seen some of the things that he was charged with. He was charged with robbery in Arkansas in approximately 1998. He was charged in 2005 in Grady County with a distribution case. He was charged around 2004, 2006 in Oklahoma County with pointing a firearm. Again in 2010, he was charged with 4 counts of distribution here in Grady County. In that case, he received a sentence of 35 years. It was 15 years to serve and 20 years of probation. He wasn't in prison very long at all, and he was back on the streets. And in 2015, his sentence, the 20 years, was revoked, and he was sent back to prison. He got out again in 2017, and in 2017, he picks up a felon in possession of a firearm charge, a bringing contraband into jail charge, molesting a motor vehicle, and possession of CDS charges. Those last 2 are misdemeanors. In that particular instance, all of those cases were put together and he received a sentence of 20 years. After 3 years, he appeared in front of the parole board on their commutation docket, and a commutation from 20 years to 9 years was granted. He's released in January of this year, approximately 3 weeks before he committed these crimes. 3 weeks. And he's back in jail again with allegations that he's killed 3 people. It's not fair. It's not fair to this family. I've sat and talked to this family now, and it's not fair to this family. There's a 4-year-old now that's no longer with us. There are members of a family who are never going to see their relatives again. Why? Because Lawrence Paul Anderson was released from prison. Let's ask the families of these victims if they feel safe. And I can tell you unequivocally they don't feel safe today. Why? They see the results. They've seen the results of what's going on with criminal justice reform. What we've done over the last several years is we've taken a prison population that was approximately 27,000 a couple of years ago, and it's been reduced down to about 22,000 today. So there's 5,000 people who were incarcerated who are now out on the streets. That 22,000 number represents about the same number of people who were in prison in 2005. Our numbers have dropped significantly, but we've not looked at keeping people safe. And I kind of like to look at it this way. We look at life and we go, okay, we have the law and we have grace. And today we are too far over into the grace side. You can't have grace without telling somebody that there's a law and you have to obey the law as well. You can't go too far over into the law side because then there's no room for compassion. And I'll tell you right now, some of the most compassionate people that I know in the state of Oklahoma are prosecutors. We take a bad rap, and people are constantly taking a shot at prosecutors all over Oklahoma because, well, those prosecutors just want to put people in prison and that's all it is. That's simply not true. There's not a prosecutor in Oklahoma that walks out of their office in the evening and thinks, man, it was a great day. I just sent 20 people to prison. Most of us go home with the baggage of having to deal with, well, there's a 4-year-old that was murdered, or there was a 6-year-old that was molested, or there's a 16-year-old that was murdered. And I've handled a lot of cases over the last several years that have involved either juveniles killing somebody or the death of a teenager or the death of a child. And it's time for us as Oklahomans to say we have an Oklahoma standard and it's time that we do better. If we have the highest incarceration rate in the world, okay, we can look at our citizens and be honest with them and tell them that you're safe. I can't tell the people in my district today that they're safe. And you hear this nonviolent offense, this nonviolent, nonviolent, nonviolent. You hear it over and over again. Well, they're just a low-level nonviolent offense. Go tell these families, the Blankenship and the Pye families, that Anderson was just a low-level nonviolent offender. Look what he's done. or is accused of doing. Those low-level nonviolent offenses don't account for much of the prison population. In fact, the prison population today, 65% of the prison population is tied to 13.1, which are 85% crime cases, or violent cases. So your murders, your manslaughters, your rapes, your robberies, your 13.1 crimes, and the rest of them being violent crimes, those are the people, 65% of our prison population, those are the people. It sounds to me like prosecutors in the state of Oklahoma. It sounds to me like our deputies, our sheriffs. It sounds to me like law enforcement is getting it right. We're sending the right people to prison. We're not sending people to prison who we're mad at. We're sending the people to prison who are truly troublesome to prosecutors. I think one of the things that has to be done to address all this is we need some transparency in our sentencing. It's really difficult for me as a prosecutor to look at a case and think, okay, I really think this offender needs to serve 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 years. What type of a sentence do I have to walk into the courtroom and get? Sometimes that means I have to go in and seek that 20-year sentence. And I can give you instances here in my district where offenders were charged with distribution, and after 3 years, and take a 20-year sentence, and after 3 years they're back on the street with an ankle bracelet. 3 years on a 20-year sentence should never happen. We need some transparency. We as prosecutors and in law enforcement need to know how much time an offender is going to serve. There's a reclassification committee through the Oklahoma Attorney General's office right now that is working on reclassifying the crimes in the state of Oklahoma. It's a great work, and it needs to be done. And I'm hopeful that the work of that committee will be done soon so that the legislature can take action on their recommendations. You know, we saw just a few months ago in the state of Oklahoma an enormous amount of money spent on State Question 805, and the voters of Oklahoma overwhelmingly rejected that state question. Well,
family member might be responsible for a by a member of their own family. Tonight, investigators are now telling us that the same family member might be responsible for a third murder. The alleged crime spree of Lawrence Anderson came less than 3 weeks after he was released from prison early. News 4's Austin Brissett with the story.
Tonight, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation still investigating the unfolding story out of Chickasha as a family demands answers as to why this man's sentence was commuted in the first place.
We've lost a part of our heart we'll never get back.
A gruesome double murder growing worse. Investigators say it started with the murder of 4-year-old Chaos and her grandfather, Leon Pye. The alleged killer, Pye's nephew, 42-year-old Lawrence Anderson. But the alleged spree didn't end there. Detectives now believe Anderson also murdered a neighbor on the same street, 41-year-old Andrea Blankenship.
We need some more answers.
Blankenship's cousin, Brooke Burris Wofford, saying the single mother of 2 lived alone and worked from home, adding that the family is unaware of any relationship between Blankenship and her alleged killer.
We want to know why this monster, who is dangerous, was released.
Anderson was originally sentenced to prison in 2006 for attacking his girlfriend. He went back to prison in 2012 for selling crack cocaine near an elementary school. Anderson was sentenced again in 2017 for having a gun and sneaking drugs into jail. However, just 3 years later, Governor Stitt signed off on a commuted sentence, which was granted by the State Pardon and Parole Board. Anderson was released from prison for a 3rd time on January 18th.
Let us know the reasoning behind why he would release such a violent criminal.
Brooke, now in the same spot as Chaos's grieving parents, who spoke to News 4 just 2 days after their daughter's murder.
I do know that my dad and my daughter is walking in the gates of heaven together. I can see my daddy picking her up saying, "Come on, Chaos. You come on with Papa, it's gonna be okay."
Now, 2 families, bonded together by an unimaginable tragedy, left hoping for justice.
We've lost a part of our heart we'll never get back.
And a 4th person, Chaos's grandmother, was also stabbed, reportedly in the eye. However, she survived the attack, and tonight she's still recovering in the hospital. At the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation's Austin Brissett, Oklahoma's News 4.
Thank you, Austin. And an important note here, all inmates have the right to request a hearing for commutation, which Anderson did. However, at the time, his probation and parole officer reported that the 42-year-old remained a threat to both himself and to society.
A 42-year-old man has just confessed to cutting out and eating a neighbor's heart after 3 people have been killed in Chickasha, Oklahoma. The event unfolded as Lawrence Paul Anderson had been staying with his 67-year-old uncle, Leon Pye, and his aunt, Delcy Pye. He had been living there since he'd been released early from prison on the 18th of January this year. He was initially sentenced to a 20-year term in 2017 after being caught with a gun and dealing in drugs, but he only served 3 of those years. Anderson told the authorities that he went over to his 41-year-old neighbour's house, Andrea Blankenship, on the 9th of February this year, before killing her and cutting out her heart. He explained that he then took the heart back to 214 West Minnesota Avenue, where he cooked it with potatoes to feed his family to release the demons. He then stabbed his uncle and a 4-year-old girl named Chaos Yates to death before he started attacking his aunt. Someone made a 911 call from home that day, but the caller hung up. Chickasha police were dispatched and attempted to make contact with the homeowner. While attempting to make contact at the door, officers heard screams of help from inside the home. Officers forced their way inside the residence and found the uncle and little girl dead. Medics took the aunt to a hospital, who survived the horrific attack and received treatment to her wounded eyes, and Anderson was arrested. The authorities are investigating whether Anderson was under the influence of drugs on the day of the stabbings. At the time of his guilty plea in 2017, he told
here at 10 o'clock. Little 4-year-old Chaos Yates, her grandfather, 67-year-old Leon Pye, and their neighbor, 41-year-old Andrea Blankenship, all brutally murdered on the same day along their quiet Chickasha street. All allegedly at the hands of this man, 42-year-old Lawrence Anderson, Pye's nephew. Anderson, a convicted felon who had recently been paroled. And we want to warn you, this story is incredibly disturbing, what we're finding out. News 4's Austin Brissett is in Chickasha with more.
There's a lot of details in these court documents here, and a lot of them are very, very graphic. And tonight, the alleged killer in a Chickasha triple murder is facing multiple charges as the families continue grieving the unimaginable tragedy.
I hope he gets the death penalty. I hope that he spends the rest of his life thinking about it until he gets his life taken, just like he took those people's lives.
Haley Blankenship speaking out just hours after charges were presented against the man who allegedly murdered her mother, Andrea. The 41-year-old mother of two's neighbors, 67-year-old Leon Pye, and his granddaughter, 4-year-old Chaos Yates, also murdered that same day, all allegedly at the hands of 42-year-old Lawrence Anderson.
It's terrible, though. It's terrible, and I'm still in shock, and my whole family is.
Tuesday night, a horrific sequence of events about the murder being revealed inside the Grady County Courthouse.
It's stuff that you see all the time on TV, and you never think it's going to happen, or it doesn't affect you.
Investigators alleging Anderson killed Andrea Blankenship first, forcing his way into her home through a back door, and according to court documents, quote, removed her heart, taking it to his uncle Leon Pye's home, where he, quote, cooked it, and allegedly tried to make Leon and his wife Delcy eat it before attacking them along with their granddaughter Chaos, who was only visiting for the day. Dropped off by her parents Toranzo and Tasha just hours before.
Tell your kids you love them. Do everything with them that you possibly can.
Delcy would survive the attack, but she suffered stab wounds in both eyes. Now released from the hospital, wearing sunglasses in the courtroom.
The death penalty is absolutely on the table.
Grady County District Attorney Jason Hicks filing the charges. And while a final decision hasn't been made on capital punishment,
I am a heavy lean towards filing that.
The gruesome murders happening just 3 weeks after Anderson was released from prison on a commuted sentence. Hicks blasting the Pardon and Parole Board's decision, pointing to Anderson's long criminal past.
I really think an offender such as this should have not ever been able to even apply for a commutation.
Meanwhile, both families left to grieve and hope for justice.
She was filled with so much love, and she cared about everyone so much.
My little soul is broken.
We're both guilty.
Anderson is facing 3 counts of murder, one count of assault and battery with a deadly weapon, and 1 count of maiming, and he was denied bond. At the Grady County Courthouse, Austin Brissett, Oklahoma's News 4.
All right, Austin, thank you. District Attorney Hicks says Anderson's commutation application was in a pile of about 600. Hicks claims there really isn't enough time to properly look through them all, saying the Pardon and Parole Board only meets once a month. However, at the same time, Anderson submitted his application. The Department of Corrections noted he was at a, quote, high risk to offend.